This week, it's Double Interview Monday. First, we welcome Luke Babarinde, Global Solution Architect at Imperva, to discuss how to build a successful API security strategy. Then we air a pre recorded interview with Bhavna Singh, Chief Technology Officer at Okta, to discuss the results of their recent research survey, AI at Work 2024, C Suite Perspectives on Artificial Intelligence. Business Security Weekly starts now.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
It's the show where we explore the business of security to improve the security of business. Your trusted source for actionable insights on leadership, communication, and innovation. Get ready for Business Security Weekly. Let's talk about something that's becoming increasingly important for enterprise companies worldwide, cyber risk management. Traditionally, cyber risk has been managed manually in silos, separate from the business's core operations. The future is about getting real-time risk insights benchmarked against your industry peers through automation. And CyberSaint's CyberStrong platform is leading the charge. CyberStrong is not just another point solution. It's a revolutionary platform. It's a quantified top-down risk approach where your unique cyber risks inform C-suite decision-making to identify your top 5 cyber risks and the controls to mitigate them. Sign up for your free cyber risk analysis by visiting securityweekly.com/cybersaint. Did you know that Active Directory is exploited in 9 out of 10 cyber attacks? With access to Active Directory, attackers can gain control of your network. To keep attackers out, you need to find and fix Active Directory security gaps. Meet Purple Knight, a free security assessment tool that scans your environment for hundreds of vulnerabilities and helps you fix the problems. Ready to reduce your Active Directory attack surface? Download Purple Knight, the #1 Active Directory security vulnerability assessment tool. Visit securityweekly.com/Sempiris. Your customers' and employees' identities are your responsibility to keep safe. But who is helping you stay safe from identity-based threats? Identity is the key to getting security right. And with the right identity partner, so much more is possible for your business than you thought. From strengthening cybersecurity to increasing revenue to reducing inefficiencies and costs, Okta unlocks growth and new possibilities for its customers. Go to securityweekly.com/Okta to learn more about Okta and the company's commitment to leading the fight against identity attacks. Welcome to Business Security Weekly. This is episode number 354, recorded June 24th, 2024. I am your host, Matt Alderman. Yes, I have a different background. We'll talk about that in a second. Joining me for this interview segment is my co-host, Mr. Ben Carr. Welcome, Ben.
It would help if I take myself off of mute there. Hey, Matt, how's it going? How's it going on this fine Monday? We're all having Monday issues, it sounds like.
Yeah, well, I'm out of the short-term place. I'm in a slightly longer-term place. So this is what it will look like for a few weeks until we have to find our third place before we, eventually finish the house. But you're in the same green screen because your house isn't done either. So
yeah, I'm just kind of in limbo of homes. So yeah, I think we should all just try to figure out different locations to be in front of. Yeah, you should pick a new house every week.
Yeah, I guess so.
Well, I'm happy to tell you that my house is new. So,
well, thanks for rubbing that in. Appreciate that.
Luke, mine was too.
Yeah. Depends upon how new. You might not have had the issues yet. Yeah.
just for everybody out there, don't remodel. Okay, just call it that. All right. First, quick announcement. Then I'll introduce Luke. Stay up to date with us on X, formerly known as Twitter, for the latest show clips and updates. Find us at SecWeekly and stay connected with the cybersecurity community. This segment is sponsored by Imperva. To learn more, please visit securityweekly.com/Imperva. Luke Babarinde is a global solution architect at Imperva, a Thales company with over 15 years of experience in cybersecurity. He is passionate about building effective solutions that assist organizations in holistically addressing applications and data security challenges. He holds an MBA in Business Administration and Management Technology from the Open University Business School and a Master's in Science in Computing, Information Security, and Forensics from the Open University. Luke, welcome to Business Security Weekly.
Well, thank you, Mr. Alderman. Happy to be here. Thank you for having me too, man.
So we're before we get into this. So Luke, I decided after 15 months to remodel my brand new house and put in a bathroom. Contractor hit the main supply line, flooded my house. So I had a new house. Now I have a. It's kind of weird. It's in the middle of demolition right now. So it's
I'm
kind
just
of an
saying, 15
interesting time.
months, man. 15
I
months.
know.
You really should have thought about things on the front side.
This is like the start of a technology talk, right? It's
Yeah,
never new. Right?
it's
Yeah,
never new.
you're in version 2.0 right now, and you found bugs.
Because so just quickly, because what's going to happen is I'm not going to put the house back the way it was because my wife is already making changes to fix the bugs. Ben,
So you're operating in an agile method, I understand.
yes, very quickly. We are iterating very rapidly. All right,
Fail
Luke.
fast,
This is
man.
So,
Fail
hilarious.
fast.
so we're going to talk about API security strategy, and it kind of ties into this whole bug process. But Luke, first of all, I always like to frame the problem situation, right? Is why should we care about API security?
And I know we're laughing about the new house and the old house, but it actually fits in perfectly, right? That it's never new. It's as new as when you got it, and it's old already, right? And when we think about application security, of which API is now fundamentally a part of, that's part of the concept. I was thinking about this too. We started out with digital transformation, we're transforming it, and then that buzzword changed to modernization a few years ago, and then last year it all became like API first. So we're back at that transformation already again, right? It's no longer modernization. It's like let's transform already again, right? So again, these are the drivers that are effectively, transforming the space, and getting us back to square one again, right? So where we're having this conversation about APIs and business logic, and well, how does that impact the whole supply chain, right? Your service chain across the board.
Well, and then we add artificial intelligence and now the need to integrate to large language models and different things. And APIs create this very interesting kind of fabric or framework, right? That allows us to do all this really advanced transformational things, but it also creates some holes and gaps from a security perspective that I don't think most people fully realize when they go down this path.
Right. I mean, the number one challenge is actually not giving credence to that very fact that you mentioned, that APIs are, it, it's effectively what makes AI work. If you have any generative initiative that you have, you're consuming APIs, right? In my applications that I built 2 years ago that I'm now transforming, I already have so many API keys built into that, meaning I am effectively consuming some APIs to make my service work, right? And that's at a micro scale, right? But you amplify that to a business, to an organization that's serving millions of customers and has hundreds of partnerships. Then you can imagine the different APIs that are necessary to make that conversation happen, right? And that's what's going on right now, and it's a huge blind spot, right, for a lot of my customers that I work with globally, where they just don't have a handle of it because they have to continue to innovate, but accounting for those APIs or the protocols that are of transaction, of interaction, that's a huge blind spot right now, for a lot of organizations.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
we
think a lot
talk.
of organizations didn't look at it right. I mean, it's the organizational sprawl, it's the business kind of reacting and saying they want to do something, they want to add this app, but then you realize there's all these API connections, and it's this kind of middleman architecture that we kind of overlooked for a long time.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, look, we've done a pretty poor job with asset management in general in cybersecurity, right? So part of this to me is an asset management problem, partially, right? I mean, we don't do a good job of hardware and software inventory or third party inventory. And now we throw APIs in the mix. Is the first thing people have to think about is discovery? Like, because you don't even know what to protect, do you?
It is absolutely the number one starting point, right? Just being able to account for the APIs that you are consuming through your service chain, right? Starting with the third party vendors that are integrated into your service, right? And the APIs that you are consuming across the chain, and be able to account for that. That's the starting point. And then start identifying how critical those APIs are and what kind of transactions are you using those APIs for, right? What kind of information has been exchanged? PII, PHI, something of business intellectual, property kind of thing, right? So not accounting for that, it's kind of, you can't secure what you don't know, right?
So,
And
so
that's why
Luke,
that becomes even more critical.
I'm interested, as you go down that line, and Matt, I was thinking the exact same thing, right? Like this is the new function of like everything's an asset, right? But as you think about that, Luke, where do you catalog it? Like where do you put it, right? Like is it in your CMDB? Is it in something else? Like do CMDBs actually account for APIs as an asset class? Like this is also a frustration.
The fact that you actually mentioned cataloging, right? It's not even a said and done thing because it's not like servers that you used to buy
Yeah, it's a
and you
life
account for
cycle.
five more new. So it's continuous. You've got to continuously monitor and identify this attack surface, right? Which are APIs as they are sprawling out, as you said before, man, right? How do we continuously account for that? And that's the battle. Now, the one time accountability and let's catalog all APIs. A lot of organizations do that, right? But you accelerate a week out and it's already too old, right? So how can we keep up to date with the changes that are coming at businesses at insane speed now, right? With AI first strategy, that's effectively what that's doing. Where development cycle is being accelerated by tenfold versus what we used to be able to do before, right? And what does that mean? More interactions, more protocols needed to make that happen through APIs, and that's why we are here. Where how do we get a handle of that problem? It's really through that continuous life cycle that you mentioned, Ben.
Yeah, so where do we do that though, Luke? Like back to
Yeah.
Ben's original question a little bit. Like I've seen the challenges in the industry, you know, trying to find our assets with vol management scanners and scanning and stuff, right? That's part of the asset pool, but not all of it. The ITSMs are a little more static almost in some cases, right?
Right.
I remember the early days of containers, pets versus cattle, right? And this stuff changes so fast. Like where is the system of record or what should be the system of record for all of this information? Because it's, to your point, it's constantly changing, it's dynamic. And I don't know that any system has been built very well to handle that dynamic nature of being able to catalog all this stuff.
Yeah, I think that's part of the challenge, though, we're thinking that it's a technology problem again, right?
Mm,
Where it's actually a governance problem, right? Where before a service goes online, we have to account for the service, not the technology, just the service. I know that I have a banking application, right? And I know that that banking application has to have login, it has to have, account transfer, it has to have account balance, it has to have credit check, right? I can catalog those first, right? If I can catalog those, then it's somewhat easier to grab our arms around what are the what's the medium making all that transaction available, right? The login, are we using third party credit check? Are we using a third party for that? Can we account for the interfaces that we are utilizing to interact with those third parties, right? And it's no longer a perimeter world, right? Where just in that user journey that I mentioned there for a banking app, you have interfaces that are beyond your boundary, right? So how do we account for that? It's through, again, technology makes it a lot easier, but if we have a right governance in place, then we can start to utilize technology to make that process easier, that life cycle of continuous delivery, discovery, and then making sure that that feeds back into the development process.
yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's a full life cycle problem, right? Like we need to address it from that full holistic perspective. I mean, I remember I was sitting in a business meeting a while back, and the discussion was about starting up this new business process, and they were talking about the end goal of, this is the process we want to start up. I was like, what about all the foundational processes that lead into that, right? How do you map it? What's the
Yeah.
flow chart? What's the Visio look like? So we can understand all the impact points. And I think you're completely right. But again, I hate to beat this dead horse, but and I don't know that we have an answer for it. But to my original question, I think where Matt followed up on, like, we need a system of record. We need something to capture this, right? And it's the same, Matt. I like how you the pets versus cattle analogy, right? Like the whole emergence of ephemeral assets. We've foundationally had this of like, well, do we need to capture these things? Like,
Right.
yeah, because if there's a problem, how do we ever reference it? If we don't know where it is, where it lies, who owns it,
Right.
right? Even if it's only up for 30 seconds, I need to know what happened in that time frame. Now, I think the API discussion, it's not necessarily as ephemeral. It's a longer term thing, but there's a lot less control that we natively have over it, either internal IT or security. These can be even governed by third party organizations that we just have a connection point to, but we need to understand it. And I think maybe you called it out there. I
Yeah.
think we need a better way from a technology side to address the full life cycle. Would
Yeah,
you
and I
agree?
think I agree totally, 100%, right? And I think this is where the role of technology vendors come into play, right? It's usually the case that you solve one problem, you're not thinking about the broader picture, right? So when you actually deal with a partner, you've got to make sure that it's a holistic. The partner has a holistic view, and let me give that example of that banking application again, right? Where you take a banking application live. Can you account for the users, what the user are doing in the browser? That's the start of the user journey, right? And as that's coming in, that's interfacing with your third party. Can you account for all the different third party deliverables? No, the dependencies, right, that are in that conversation, right? Do you have visibility? Can your technology partner provide you that? Then, as the service chain is coming in, right, the calls are coming into your data center. Can you account for the interfaces that are being utilized? So it starts from the user browser, right, with the user journey all the way through to your data center. Can you fully account for that end to end, right? I mean, that's what we do very well here at Imperva Number One, right? Taking that holistic view into the design phase and making sure that everything that we develop accounts for holistic strategy and not just simply solve one problem and leave the other nine, right? And that's the right approach for organizations.
Luke, I think you're making a great case for the CISO and the CIO to actually be part of the business and not just treat it as an afterthought. Like it's
Hey,
amazing reasoning, right? Like
I,
this is why like the CISO needs to be part of the meeting is because it's a cradle to grave scenario, right? It's from the instantiation of why you're doing this for as the business to how you sunset it at the end of the day. Yeah.
and the way that I talk to leaders about this is if you are commissioned to build an airport for your new city, you're not just going to go run, build a runway. Yeah,
Yeah.
we can land the planes now. That's not the starting point. You actually go right back
Yeah.
and think, okay, what are the things that I need to think about? The proximity of the airport to the city, the security of the airport. Those are the number one things that we think about when we are building physical buildings that we need to secure, right? So it's fascinating that we haven't really fully transferred that into the cyber realm, right? But that's exactly what needs to change.
All right. So we the asset problem is part of this, right? I think the second problem is just the sheer number. So how do even if I had a full catalog of all my APIs, my guess is that list is pretty massive for most organizations. Now I got to think about again, I go back to my vuln management days. Just because I have, a million vulnerabilities doesn't mean I can fix a million vulnerabilities. Kind of the same thing with APIs. We need to prioritize where do I focus now, right?
That is the big challenge, right? The starting point, obviously, the discovery, but the second thing, when you run through the discovery process, you're going to discover thousands of APIs. But how do you really focus on APIs that are of high fidelity to the business, that the business actually depends on to operate, right? So the starting point of that is classification, where you classify the APIs, you understand the APIs that hold key role in delivering those services, right? Authentication, authorization, right? APIs that are providing certain specific microservices that are tied to certain APIs, and then be able to account for which interfaces within those microservices are being used. And classification process comes into play. Again, that has to be continuous, right? Where you are able to account for the APIs, but be able to have a laser focused approach as to which APIs are actually of high fidelity to the business. That we need these APIs to operate. If they are compromised, then we are losing intellectual property or we are losing customer sensitive data, right? And that's the best place to start. Then you can start to map out to how you kind of develop that into a broader enterprise plan, right? That you can execute across the board.
Agreed. I still think, you know, figuring out prioritization still might be a little tough for some. I assume you start with, critical assets, critical interfaces to those assets, et cetera. It goes back to a little bit to other conversations we have on the show around risk prioritization, right? If I can't classify it, I can't quantify it in some respects, like how am I ever going to prioritize it? I mean, I guess some of those same challenges exist in API land. So outside of doing crown jewels analysis, which I think is important, and understanding the interfaces through your discovery, any other recommendations for people to think through how do I start? Because to me, that's still the big question,
How do
big
you start?
challenge.
I mean, you think of her, and we take a step back. The API security problem is actually a data problem, right? The
Hmm.
APIs are the protocols that allow you to transact and make this conversation happen, right? But it's a data problem. Who are you sharing your data with, right? What data do you have that the consumers need to consume? And if we think of it from that perspective, it kind of simplifies it. If you're having a conversation with a, if the service is having a conversation with a customer, right, transacting with a customer, then we know that that transaction has to be fully secure, right? If that transaction leaks out, whether it's the credentials or the actual nature of the transaction, then that's problematic from risk perspective to the business, right? So we secure that channel. Right. So again, it comes back to having the right governance strategy in place, being able to account for all your assets in form of the API endpoints that are exposed to the internet, classify the type of conversations, the transactions, right? And I'm using words that are easy to just kind of understand here, right? The type of conversations, transactions that are occurring across those APIs, be able to account for that, classify that, then build your risk management around that, right? Where you have full visibility now, you can start to prioritize which assets you need to secure based on what criticality they provide, right, to the business, whether it's our, service that provides service to your customer, your third party vendor relationships. That's critical to be able to bring that into board. But again, having that holistic view where it's not simply just an API that's exposed to the internet and you just want to secure that API as quickly as possible. Think of the dependencies in between that you may not even be accounting for.
Yeah. I mean, that's, it gets a little complex very quickly. Um, right. Just because there are so many potential interactions with the data and the data sources. And again, if you don't have a good asset repository and understand where all that's at, this can be very challenging for organizations. Um, when you think about who needs to be involved in API strategy, Ben brought this up a little bit earlier, right? The CIO and the CISO need to be at the meeting. The
Yeah.
CTO probably needs to be at the meeting too, right? Depending on the organization, because they're driving these. So how do you create the kind of this cross collaboration? Because if all these people aren't in the meeting together, I don't know how you actually get your arms around an API security
Right.
strategy.
I've had a so I came from data security background where we would actually go out there and discover data and secure that data, access to the data. And the only way those programs ever worked was never to involve just security or just involve compliance. It was always a cross collaboration project. And the more cross collaborated it is, the better the deliverables, right? So when the business is actually leading this from the top, where there's an agreed tone at the top, where there's like, "Yep, let's go for it." You have all the right stakeholders involved. That's when you have success, right? So the struggle that I've seen lately is being security taking on the challenge of API security, and we're like, "Oh, our developers, they're not really involved." That's not a good strategy. It's got to be a cross-functional, operation where it's not simply owned by security or owned by development team or owned by the business. It's strategically tied into the go to market for any digital service that you have, and that involves the CIO, that involves the CEO, right? Because when the APIs are compromised, it's a CEO's problem, right? So it's across the board: security, digital teams, CIOs, anyone that values the data that an organization has, right? It's that's really where the cross functional nature of it comes into play, and again, when you think of the traditional technology where you have a firewall, fourth generation firewall, security can own that because they see everything, right? But now you need context. What's the API doing? Security cannot tell you that. They need access to the development teams, to the to the product teams. And that's again why the API security is such a huge problem for organizations to kind of tackle right now.
Yeah, there's
Yeah.
just no area that silos can really operate in today's digital
Mm-mm.
world. It just doesn't work. It's got to be cross-functional for it to be successful.
Eliminate silos. That should be number one, right?
Yeah, I mean, we saw this in application security a few years back, right? Is, you know, the application development teams need to working with security, providing different tools, right? And there was always, we always thought that the application developers were going to use our tools, and we knew that wasn't the case. That we had to integrate into their tools. I assume we get some of those same issues are resurfacing now with API security, right? Because again, the development team is either integrating to those APIs or creating their own APIs. There needs to be visibility across the teams. I assume there has to also be collaboration across the tool sets because, again, developers are using a whole different set of tools than security is to try to secure this. how do you bring this stuff together in a way that gives visibility not only to security but also to the development teams?
Absolutely. And when I talk to mostly security teams, and the way that I explain this to them is this is going to transform the relationship that you have with developers. You are no longer going to developers and say, "Hey, tell me about your APIs. Tell me which ones." You're actually going back to them with valuable information. Say, "Hey, here is what we are seeing. Right? Are you aware of this APIs that are exposed to the internet?" Security has the ability now to use that observability to enhance the relationships outside of security, right? Digital teams, development teams, and really bring them in, as opposed to, oh yeah, we need you to do this, right? It's always been, it's kind of like a competitive relationship where you push to them what they need to do and they never quite do it, and it's we have this back and forth. But now we can actually invert that process where we provide valuable information to the development process, and they value that observability because it's something they were not aware of before. And I think that's the mindset that practitioners need to take into leadership, right? For these type of initiatives, for it to actually take hold, to where we have AI first strategy that's meeting security first strategy, and you're working hand in hand together.
So, Luke, when you and Matt were talking about this, I was thinking that that's kind of one side of the equation, right? But there's this whole other part of the equation that I think we're generally missing out on. I just want to see if you agree with this. Is the application problem was often a development problem. It was development and security. We had DevSecOps, trying to do they holistically do it? Does security participate? But we're dealing with an even more complex scenario right now because it's not even internal development teams, right? We're dealing with third-party apps and third-party teams that are external to the organization, and there's really a lack of an input or an emphasis on security in some cases because it's the business interacting directly, and my data doesn't even exist in my org. So that adds a whole nother layer of complexity on this discussion that we haven't really talked about really yet. Do you agree with that?
I agree with what you actually said there. And I think a piece of it that we had not drafted in is the business logic layer, right? Where it's no longer just the vulnerabilities that are built into the applications. In a lot of cases, what we are seeing are the applications are developed correctly by the development teams, but the bad actors are pretty much abusing that business logic layer, right? Where it's not just a vulnerability you scan for with your traditional tools and you see a CV attached to it. It's no longer that. It's abusing the business logic layer, the way users interact with it. Bad actors get in the middle of that, and they are no longer doing your SQL injection command to steal data. They are effectively identifying those flaws, ever so subtle, and they're accelerating those with bots, right, to exploit those flaws. Now, back to that point that you made, Ben. I think that actually ties back to that third party dependency, and I categorize this as our really two unknowns: the attack surface unknown, and the attack vectors are now unknown because the bad actors are emerging threats. On the attack surface layer, that's exactly what you said there comes into play, where the third party element, the component, where you have third party developers, not just partners, that comes into play. How do you manage that full life cycle, right?
Mhm.
Uh, the key thing here is you still own the service, right? So as a business, you still be able to account for the transactions and what the users are doing with that service. And from that, you have a huge leverage in being able to see into the third party element and be able to rein in on that with the right, with the right approach, right? The right observability that you have, which is kind of what I do primarily in helping businesses through that process.
At least you hope so, Luke. Right? I'm just saying. I go back to my third party risk management days. Sometimes the it was everything, the horse was out of the barn. There was no way to get it back in. Right? Like if the business made a decision on using a service and built it in before you got a chance to observe it and make sure it's secure. Sometimes it's hard to go back and fix that, right? So again, I think collaboration is important, but there's been a lot of relationships that the business has already built with some of these third parties, which adds a level of complexity because it's already been built. Like, how do you now go back and try to fix something that was already built and is already working just because security says maybe it's not a secure way to do it? You know what I
Yeah, and the
mean? That's a
security
Yeah,
team
challenge.
internally can't throw up its hands, right? Like you still own the risk. Like
the,
outsourcing this stuff does not get you out of outsourcing the risk. It doesn't work that
yeah,
way.
and this is the limitation with shift left strategy, where it's not every vulnerabilities or weaknesses that you find, or you can just go back and talk to Matt, and Matt is going to fix it in his code, right? In a lot of cases, it's so outside of the limit of what we can do, right? So how do you address that? That's exactly where you can leverage technology again, right? Where what we do specifically is assisting customers identify those risks that they no longer have control over. It's old app, it's a legacy application. They have no idea who the developer is. How can you still secure that application, right? And that's where it's not simply a matter of discovery and classification. You actually need to be able to stop the bad actors from exploiting any vulnerabilities or weaknesses that are inherently built into those applications, regardless of who owns the application, who are the third party developers. You still want to have control over that, right? And that's where that right partnership with the right vendor comes into play, making sure that you're not simply just using a one point solution to try and solve this problem.
Yeah, one point solution is not going to solve this problem. It's just too complex. I mean, I think through just the last 3 4 years, right? Things have evolved so quickly. The genie's out of that bottle. Putting it back in is really tough. And if you're not working across the business, I don't know how you get your arms around this effectively. That's why I love this topic around app user and data, right? Because this is all API driven, right? And if you're going to solve for app user data, you better have a pretty good API strategy.
Absolutely. Right. And if you're gonna have her, we're talking about, generative AI, where the agentic AIs are now real, where your software developers are being replaced by these agents. I wrote a database based application where I had to type, I kind of have the structure of the queries that are going to be launched into the database inside my code, and I had to, handcraft that. But I can deploy an agent into that picture that just does that automatically, right, through native language, right? So that's the kind of shift that's happening. That's going to even expand, compound this problem, right? And the way to really get a handle of it is to get in front of it, like you said, be able to account for your assets, be able to account for the protocols, the nature of the conversation, classify them, understand the risks, right? Start with, using inverted strategies, right? Start with the end game. And if anything goes wrong from that end game, what's likely to fall, right? And then using that strategy really helps you at least mitigate the likelihood of something crazy going on that's completely out of control, and you were never prepared for it, right? That's the right approach going forward for professionals across the board.
Yes. Luke, thank you so much for joining us on Business Security Weekly.
Thank you for having me. Thank you, man.
To learn how to build your API security strategy, please visit securityweekly.com/Imperva. We're going to take a quick break and then air our pre-recorded interview with Bob Nassing from Okta.